Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening from me too.
Thank you, Jacob, for that very fine introduction for myself and Aunty here tonight. Our guest this evening, I would like to welcome Dr. Lois Peeler, AM, a proud and passionate Yorta and Wurundjeri woman whose family hails from Cummeragunja Mission. Aunty Lois has dedicated much of her time over the many years and much of her energy for the betterment of all Aboriginal people, and indeed her own local community right here in Victoria. Spending many decades, of course, working tirelessly across the arts, working passionately as an educator, also working across many sectors, including tourism, the public sector, education, and Aboriginal community development. Have I covered everything there? But there's more, isn't there, Auntie?
There might be.
Yes. Welcome this evening to the History Salon.
Thank you.
Our fourth one, indeed. We'll start at the very beginning, as we do with all of our lovely elders. You're from Cummeragunja Mission, from the Briggs family.
Yes, my family were on Cummeragunja Aboriginal Reserve, which before becoming an Aboriginal Reserve was Maloga Mission on the banks of the Murray River. So that's my mother's ancestral homelands. And on my father's side, I'm Wurundjeri, but at the age of 15, he came under the government policy of the day, where if you were of mixed blood, then you were required to leave the Aboriginal Reserve. And so what he did was go to Cummeragunja, and so there he met my grandmother, who was a Yorta woman, and they married and had the biggest family. So yeah, I got the biggest mob.
So how many children do they have, Auntie?
They had 10 children, and so they all had big families. All of the all of their children.
Yes, indeed. You grew up at Cummeragunja Mission with your mother, Auntie Jerry. We have some beautiful photographs here to share.
Mm.
And like all our mothers, who are strong and lead the way for us in our lives, don't they? What influence did your mother have?
Well, I actually come from a very strong line of very strong Aboriginal women. And my grandmother, whose traditional name was Yirramboi, she was a presence in herself. She had 3 children taken away under the stolen generation. And she never gave up hope, and she followed her eldest daughter around, Aunty March Tucker, who went on to write a book. But my mother was the youngest child, so she wasn't taken away at the time, because the government policy at that time was targeting teenage girls, and my mother was only 6, so she escaped being removed. But that had an impact on her and, of course, my grandmother. So my mother went on to be a very strong woman and was very much involved in Aboriginal affairs, and was actually awarded an AO for her work in Aboriginal community. Passionate about Aboriginal rights, in Aboriginal health, and was actually part of an Aboriginal and Islander women's movement that started the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service, because they were services that we needed in our communities. The impact of all of that removal of children, poor health, lack of access to services that are open to the broader community, they were really the things that, drove her, I think, to get that deep involvement. So that's how that all came about.
And you've been speaking of the strong women who were very active politically here in Victoria, of course. What was it like growing up and watching your aunties and nanas, of course, and sisters work around you in the political movement?
When I look back, it was very formative for us all, but at the time we didn't understand because my mother and my sisters and, they were all involved in Aboriginal affairs, and often, because we were living in the country, would have to leave to come down to Melbourne or to go to Canberra or whatever. And in those days we didn't have the services that we have today, the Indigenous services. So they were actually the fighters, that were struggling to bring about better services for our people. So whilst we didn't understand it, I guess it just became part of our life.
Indeed. And of course, a beautiful photograph here of your mother and with students teaching them culture at school well before the days, before cross-cultural awareness. Or, our parents weren't paid to go into schools back then, eh? They would do it off their own back, Auntie.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the Cummeragunja experience because this is about the arts, and on Cummeragunja there was a very strong movement around what you call the arts, but for us mime and song and dance, and that's all part of how we tell our stories, and that was a very strong culture at Cummeragunja. And then we had concert parties and choirs. And the concert parties would go around to the hospitals. They'd have a pleasant Sunday afternoon at the churches where Aboriginal choirs would go. So there was this strong arts movement from the Aboriginal people that were on the mission. And so song and dance were always really important, and indeed when I was growing up we used to have concert parties because that was before the days of television or mobile phones and all of this, and we were living on the riverbanks of after walking off Cummeragunja Aboriginal Reserve. A lot of Yorta people walked off because of the way that people were being treated and the threat of the removal of children from them. But so they settled on the fringes of the towns, and so my family went to Shepparton Marupna area, and we're on the banks of the Goulburn River. And so there was also very little work, and so the concert parties were a way of, I guess, fundraising, which would then be distributed amongst the families that were participating. And I can remember me and Auntie Pam Pedersen,
yes.
who many of you will have heard her name, I'm sure. Well, we used to be doing dances and things like that, but all of us had a role. So the arts is always, we've always been sort of involved. So when we were washing dishes or scrubbing floors, we'd be singing and all of that. So it just became natural, I suppose.
Quite natural, which brings us to our next slides, of course. Your time spent working across the arts in an amazing career in which not many people to date have even done such a thing. Aunty Lois, an amazing modelling career, of course, which began at the Glenda Marshall Model School.
Brenda Marshall, actually.
Yeah. Was that here in Melbourne?
Yeah, in Collins Street. At the time, I was living at the Aboriginal Girls Hostel in Cunningham Street, Northcote, working at Hilton Hosiery over in Brunswick. I was. And so, I guess that was a prompter for me to say, I want to do something else. So I enrolled myself in the Brenda Marshall Model College and did all that. And that's the night of my graduation there. And I was offered some amazing opportunities as a result of that. One being I was offered a position at GTV9, working with Hal Todd on the breakfast session. I was also offered a professional modelling job with the Australian Wool Bureau, as it was known at the time, to tour with the gold medal garments. I think it was the 1961 gold medal garments. So that kind of catapulted me into professional modelling.
And tell me about the time when you were studying to be a model in the school. Of course, you were the only Aboriginal lady in there. What was that like? And what were the other women like towards you? Of course, the modelling industry to this date is still very, not very diverse, and there are still lots of black people that are kept out on the international catwalk. So I'm wondering, what was it like back then for you, Auntie?
I took it in my stride. I think I've always, that's one thing that's handed down to from a big family of girls and strong women. I was able to, hold my head up and say, I can do this, which helped me immensely. I think being proud of who you are, your identity, that's always been something that, helped me, but also being able to pass that on to the young people of today.
I'm very impressed that you signed up for the modelling school yourself. No one else told you to get along, or you should go and sign up for the modelling school?
No, I did that. I'd go after I finished work. After I was pressing stockings at Hilton Hosiery, I'd take myself off to modelling school. But I guess it was an exciting new experience for me, and I enjoyed it very much.
And we do have something in common that not many people know here, but I did pay for my way through school modelling as a young girl as well. I was so shy that I used to walk with, it's hard to believe, right, but I used to walk with my head down. So my mother, thought, I can't have my daughter raised like this, so off you go to modelling school. And Mum created a monster, I think. But it was an invaluable experience. It paid my way through school, and it was only amateur modelling, nothing of the international level that, the success that you have seen, Auntie. What are some of your best memories from modelling back in the day?
Well, when I was working with the Australian Wool Bureau, it's now the Australian Wool Board, but at the time it was Australian Wool Bureau. And when they invited me to be part of the gold medal garments gala parade, it was, and some of you may remember Horidagi Quintet, and there was an opera singer called Estrelita, so it was a big production, and they actually made garments especially for me, for my skin tones and everything, and I thought that was wonderful. So some of the images that I've got now from that day, and the models that I worked with when we were moving around. But a particularly great thing for me was that when I went to the country towns or, to other states, the Aboriginal people that I met would always come out and, make me feel welcome, and I guess, it was nice for them to make that connection. So it was a really unifying thing for me to be proud of who I was and saying, they were promoting me like first Aboriginal model and all of this. And I was. But I think what I'm saying is that other Aboriginal people were celebrating my success, which was really important to me.
And that's a wonderful thing. And we'll continue to do that, Aunty Lois. Let's look at the next photograph with your sister. Tell us about this photograph. Of course, the Sapphires we come to now in your career.
Well, I'll just say something here, because I was a freelance model. So that meant that you would take jobs when you could, what I mean about that. And sometimes the jobs were few and far between, so you had to have something else to do. So that's when we would be performing, that's when the singing and everything came in. And so that's my sister Laurel. And we toured Vietnam in the 60s, and that was great because, hey, we got a lot of attention in Vietnam,
Also, when the Vietnam War was on, you toured,
it was the height of the war and everything, and we thought, oh, this is pretty all right, But when we got there, we didn't think too much about it. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie, The Sapphires, but one of the women, I think it was Cynthia, said, yeah, let's go to Vietnam. Where's Vietnam? I mean, it was kind of like that, But when we got there, Saigon Airport was hit that afternoon. That was the airport that we came in on. So we kind of said, hey, this is real. And it was like that from there on. We were there for 3 months and toured all around South Vietnam. It was quite an experience. I mean, in those days, I think people were drafted and so forth. So we were very pleased to be able to bring a little bit of joy to the lives of the young people that were over there at the time.
And some scary experiences would have cropped up in your time touring as well.
There were many, because we were always escorted when we were travelling around, so it might have been in a convoy of trucks, and we'd be sitting in the back and you could see the traces going over the back, and the driver would be putting the lights on and off so they couldn't track us through the headlights. And sometimes we'd be going through villages where there'd been skirmishes during the day, and you'd see all sorts of sights and that. And then, it was a strange kind of war. And this is very well depicted in the movie The Sapphires, because there was the clubs in Saigon and restaurants and markets, and all of those things were still happening. But you didn't know who was the enemy at the time, and so that was one of the things in the movie. And so when you'd come out of, say, if there was a restaurant, they'd be, surveying underneath the vehicles to make sure there wasn't any explosives attached underneath. So you always had to be on your, on the ready. But we didn't really think about that when we said we'd go. We just thought it was a big adventure. But, being in a war zone was really a very rude awakening, I can tell you.
What was it like when you came back home to Melbourne after touring with your sister? You would have had some yarns to tell the family around the fire, eh?
Yes, we did. Many. I'd urge you to go and see The Sapphires if you haven't seen it. Oh, you don't have to go. You can get it on Netflix now, so it's all easy.
Or a DVD.
But it's very well, of course it's a story, but it's based on true happenings. And so at the end there was this celebration and there was romance and everything, and that happened.
Indeed, which just brings us to the part before the film, of course. It was Laurel's son, Tony Briggs, back in 2012, who wrote the play for The Sapphires. What was your first reaction when he came to you and your sister to propose this theatre piece?
For years, I don't think Laurel and I really thought about it. We'd often talk around the kitchen table. Oh, do you remember that? And I think Tony was fascinated by some of the stories, and he started to record them. And when Laurel told me, I said, who'd be interested in that? And then he told me after the play was written, and it was, it was a big hit. And it played here, it played at the Belvoir in Sydney, at the Swan Theatre and elsewhere. And then Tony said, they're going to make it into a movie. And I kind of said, oh yeah, I'll wait to see, when that happens. And well, it did, and of course it was a very successful production and still remains, I think, quite a popular movie. So,
what was opening night like for you, for the opening of The Sapphires?
Oh, it was fabulous. Yes. And that was in... that was here.
We had that. Yes, and
we
the
had
original
that here in Melbourne.
Members.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think because we had one in Sydney as well. And yes, it was here.
So there was the original Sapphires there as well. Even though there were two of you who only went to tour, there was Naomi Mayers, Laurel Robinson, yourself, and Beverly Briggs as well. Yes.
So yes, we're all involved in Aboriginal affairs. whilst I'm in education, the others were all in health and worked at the Aboriginal Medical Service in Redfern. And one still does. 2 are in retirement now. And I'm still working, of course, and I love what I'm doing in education. But so that's how we started, and yeah.
Speaking of education, Auntie, we come to our next slides. Of course, you are currently the Executive Director at Worawa Aboriginal College, which is out at Healesville. It's a beautiful college for our young women from right across Australia. And, of course, this school was started by your own family, by your late sister.
Yes, I hold the position of Executive Director and Principal. And the school was started by my late sister Hillis Maris, who was also in the arts. So Hillis was the co-writer of Women of the Sun. She was a poet, and she wrote many poems and stories. So she had this passion about education, and our passion comes from our lived experiences, that we feel that, and I still have this belief, that education is the key for our people. And unless you have access to education, our young people are not going to be able to make it. They might be able to make it in other ways, but I still believe that education is very important for our pathways. So Hillis and I shared that belief. And what we found, and Hillis's experience of living, remember I said we lived on the riverbanks, the Goulburn River in Shepparton, Mooroopna, after the Cummeragunja walk-off. And when the Aboriginal people tried to access education in the mainstream, they were rebuffed. They could not go into these schools. And then later on, when they did, it was always that the kids were sitting at the back of the room. They were, the curriculum was inappropriate, and it's there's no recognition of First Nations people and so forth. And so Hillis determined that we would have a school that met the academic needs, the health and well-being needs, and the cultural needs of our young people. And that's what Worawa College does today. So we still hold true to those values, and we practice culture, and we do that through the arts. So we've got a very strong arts program at Worawa, got a very strong academic program, but it's suited to the needs of our children. So this year we introduced a VCAL program where the girls are actually going off and doing work experience in all sorts of, the different industries and so forth. And so it's about, how I said before about identity and self-esteem, which is so important for anybody really. But there was a gap in our education in that regard. So we place a lot of emphasis on Aboriginal, being proud of our identity, knowing who we are, knowing where we are as First Nations people in this country. That photo there is actually me because I also have a role with the Regional Aboriginal Justice Advisory Committee, of which I chair. So I invite the girls to come along to learn about the issues that are important to us as a country, what are particularly affecting our young people. And so you can see that some of those girls, I think, are sitting there on this Rajak meeting, and that brings together government agencies, police, magistrates, everybody. So it's good grounding for them to know about, citizenship and so forth. They're good coffee makers too, because we have a barista course, so they serve everybody with the coffee.
And what's some of the feedback that you get from the young women after going to such a meeting?
Well, they really like the opportunity because they're getting to really understand what are some of the issues. I mean, I always talk about Aboriginal issues and contemporary issues and about the past, because that's part of our history, our shared history. And I think it's only important that our young people have that understanding. But they really, because many of these young people are going to go back into their communities, wherever that might be, and they will become the leaders in the future. So I want to prepare them so that they have an understanding when they go on to do that. But, well, yesterday we were at Government House and they were singing, because we've got a singing group again, singing in Aboriginal language and saying our poem written by Hillis Morris, our founder, as the flag, the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Island flag were raised at Government House. So I think that was a pretty special occasion. So they get to understand the history about that, and, you know, here we are all these years afterwards and they're just raising the flag and properly acknowledging the Aboriginal people. So I thought that was pretty special.
Just beautiful. And important too that these young women are experiencing issues around justice, because they're issues that are Australia-wide, aren't they, that concern Aboriginal people. The incarceration of Aboriginal people is at an all-time high. And I understand recently you did go into Port Phillip Prison. I spoke to Robbie out there, lovely Robbie West, who's the Aboriginal Liaison Officer, who said that you'd popped out there for NAIDOC Week as well. How important is it for you to keep the links with the brothers on the inside?
Well, my passion is about early intervention and diversionary measures so that we don't continue to have these high numbers of our people, particularly our young people, in incarceration. So I'm working with government and with the judiciary and so forth to see if we can find another way. But that's still a pilot. But I think it's important to understand that, with my school, the young ladies that come there come from across the country. Now, we're an independent school and we cater. We're one of 2 schools in the whole of Australia that caters for the social and emotional well-being of our young people. So we're recognised by government for that. So what does that mean? It means that if children are coming from a traumatised background, if they've had gaps in their education for whatever reason, they can come to Worawa and have the support and the focus that they need to be engaged in their education. And so giving them exposure to things that, impact us as a community, on justice issues, but also celebrating things as we did yesterday, I think that's extremely important.
And speaking about celebrating, of course, you do have a debutante ball coming up.
Oh, I
at
do.
Worawa Aboriginal College. If I can show everybody the beautiful invite.
Well, let me tell you about that, because we have a program at Worawa called Pathways to Womanhood. So it's preparing the young women to make a healthy transition to adulthood. And most of, if not all of the young women that come there do come from compromised backgrounds. So they would never get the opportunity to learn some of the things that we, the experiences that we provide. And that all culminates in debutante dreaming, as we've termed it. And, it's a very special occasion, so we kind of bring in some traditional aspects, but along with the contemporary things. And it's something that, it's a rite of passage, and many of the mainstream schools do it, and we do it, but we do it with an Aboriginal twist.
But it's not the first year that Worawa Aboriginal College has done this. In fact, the very first Aboriginal debutante ball that took place, and there's a beautiful photograph here, 1949. Incredible.
And, this year I chose to use that because we've just come through NAIDOC, and the theme was because of her, we can. And these young women were in 1949, by the way, I'm in that. They were coming from the riverbanks that I was telling you about in Shepparton and that. So this was the very first time. That was held at the Collingwood Town Hall. And at that time, there was no acknowledgement. I think that was a huge step for them. And they did it with a lot of training. And I understand that the girls were always there to do the rehearsals, but they had to go and get the fellas out of the bush.
Hey, that'd be right, eh?
But, there's fathers. My father was, because I've got 3 or 4 sisters in there. So, it was a real community event. So it wasn't the kind of debutante that we have in most of the schools today. It was really a community event, and it was making a statement. And I do it because I can. Yeah. And to honour them and to give our girls the opportunity to have that experience after they finish the Pathways to Womanhood program. So.
And we do recognise my beautiful mother-in-law, Lillian Tamaru, in here as well. Thank you for bringing that in tonight. My apologies, I don't have that on the slide for you, Mob. It's a beautiful photograph.
Oh, I've got some around if you'd like to.
But I'm sure there's more. Yes.
It's going to be held at Pullman on the Park on the 8th of September. And if anybody is interested in coming along, I can assure you you'll have a wonderful night.
So you can go to the Worawa College website or give the college a call and buy your ticket. Get in early. Too deadly. What's some of the feedback that you get from the young women when they go through the debutante process? Of course, as young women, it's an important rite of passage, isn't it? But I think particularly as Aboriginal women to do this together, which is very unique, that doesn't happen across Australia.
No, that's true. There's various, it's experiential learning, and so there are different modules of their learning. But for some of these young women, for example, we take them to lunch at a restaurant or breakfast, and I've taken them to the Sofitel for that kind of thing. I don't pull punches.
Lovely, yes.
But, the thinking is because we get so, what's the word? We take everything for granted. But for some of these young women, they'll say, I can't go in there. And I say, why can't you? So it's giving them the experience that they would never have had. And then when they go in to a place and they can feel comfortable and relaxed, it makes such a difference. And that's what I try to do, to say, yes, you can do it, give them all those opportunities, because they keep thinking, some of them, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them will think, that's not for me, I can't do that. Well, actually, there was just something at the Melbourne Museum about you can't do that. And I was in it, so I says, yes, you can do that.
And that's so important, what you have the young women go through. Just everyday stuff, isn't it? Which is really important, Auntie. Of course. Brings us now to the rest of the work that you've done in the community. So much work, Aunty Lois Peeler. You've indeed headed the Aboriginal Tourism Australia for more than a decade. What did you love about your work there, working with Aboriginal tourism?
I loved that the diversity of Indigenous Australia was, it's just amazing. But actually going out and working and meeting with people, because it was about building capacity to run a tourism business. And we were an association, Aboriginal Tourism Australia was an association for all of the Indigenous operators. And so one of the things that I did, which I'm very proud of, I initiated a tourism expo at the Sydney Opera House, which brought all of the tour operators, the Indigenous tour operators in together, but all of the buyers and so forth. And now they're doing it, on a regular basis at the Sydney Opera House. So I'm quite proud of that too.
Just one of the areas, indeed, in which you've paved the way. Do you see yourself as a maverick in what you've done in community development, across the public sector, in education?
No, I see myself as a facilitator.
Beautiful. Beautiful. What's left for Aunty Lois Peeler to do in her lifetime, may I ask?
Well, I'm working on a very important project at the moment, which is on the Worawa property. And for those of you who are aware of the history of Corranderk Aboriginal Station. That's where the school is located. And my grandfather was born on Corranderk, and there's a sad story about that. It wasn't a happy place. None of the missions were, by the way. So I'm working on a project at the moment which honours all of the Victorian Aboriginal tribes that, and there are 38 of them, that many came through the mission movement. And there was this dispersal and disconnection from country and from family because the children were taken away and they were put in dormitories, and then they had to go out and work for the landowners, new landowners, and they worked as domestic servants, the girls, or farm labourers for the boys. So this is another reason why I and my family have been passionate about education, because that's part of our experience. And, when they took the girls away to Cummeragunja Girls' Home, well, I had 3 aunties taken away, so they were just taught to look after the children or look after the chooks or whatever and cook and all that. So they were never given the opportunity to have an academic education. And in fact, my Auntie Marge Tucker was also awarded. That's my mum's sister, the oldest one that was taken away, and she wrote her memoirs in a book called If Everyone Cared, and she tells about her experience. And then her daughter, Molly Dyer, went on to be the founder or, a member of the founding group for the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Association. So I'm very proud to say that, those are the experiences and those are the women that have been in my life, and I guess, they've been the very strong role models for me. And, so what else can I say?
Exactly. You just mentioned there an Aboriginal controlled organisation, one of which, another organisation, the Aborigines Advancement League in Thornbury, of which you did work back in the day. What year did you start working at the league?
That was when I came back from America, because I lived in America for a number of years.
Where you did raise your 2 children. We
one
have
of
your
them's
beautiful
here, by the
daughter
way.
here tonight and grandson.
Yeah. Oh, there she is.
Oh, there she is, over there. Hey,
Yeah, everybody says, oh, she's got an accent. She's got an American accent. Yeah, she grew up in America. I started work. I was working with Hillis, my sister, because she had this vision. When we were living in America, Hillis came over and told me about her plans for the school, which really excited me. And I think that was the thing that says, you know what, I want to go back and be part of this. And it wasn't long before we found out that Hillis was quite ill. And I was going to RMIT to do business administration, and Hillis was supporting me to do that. And then she became very ill, and I went into the Aborigines Advancement League as assistant director to Aunty Elizabeth Hoffman, who was another one of our elders that was the leader in her day. And I had to drop out of that and take on the role working with Hillis. So that's how that came about.
Yes. Indeed, some other amazing milestones in your career. In 2013, the Centenary Medal, you were awarded for your work in tourism. Mm. Were you proud of that honour bestowed on you, Auntie?
Yeah, it was huge. The tourism industry, particularly in Indigenous tourism, was minuscule. We were trying to grow it, and at that time trying to provide the Aboriginal operators and Torres Strait Islander operators with the business, tourism business knowledge and skills and exposure to the industry. And that was incredibly interesting, because I got to go around to all states, and every state was different, and get to know all of the operators and the communities and so forth. But it was pretty hard going, because we were trying to grow the association as an Indigenous organisation, and it wasn't fully supported because the government then took on the role of being the Indigenous tourism operators. We're always in that kind of situation, I think.
What do you think of the current state of play of the tourism landscape across Australia?
Well, I do keep an eye on it because it's an industry that I really loved, and I'm very pleased to see that there's so much growth in the sector, and that they continue to have events at places like the Opera House, but also are involved in the Australian Tourism Exchange and all of these things where it's absolutely critical to be part of if you're going to be in the industry. So, I'm pleased to see that it's still developing.
In 2014, Aunty Lois, you were made a member, AM, in the General Division of the Order of Australia Medal for significant service to the Indigenous community as an educator, advocate and role model. Can you take me back to that evening back in 2014 when you were awarded the AM?
First of all, I couldn't believe that I was being awarded, nominated. And I went along to Government House with many Australians who had been nominated, and I was just amazed when... Oh no, that's the other one, sorry.
That's all right. There's so many medals and awards that Auntie has won. It's hard to keep track.
Sorry.
Where are we?
I forget.
Well, last year, let's talk about last year. 2017, of course, you were named the Victorian Senior.
That's the one I'm talking about.
That's an incredible
That's the
honour.
story I was just telling you about. But there were so many amazing achievers in that, cohort, and I really couldn't believe that I got it. So I was very honoured indeed, and went up to Canberra and was part of all of that wonderful experience as well.
And last year, of course, you were also conferred as an honorary doctorate role in education. Dr. Lois Peeler.
That's right, a doctorate of the social sciences, and that was through RMIT, so I've been honoured indeed, very blessed. Thank you.
I want to go back to talking about Worawa Aboriginal College. It has an ethos, an approach, a holistic approach to education. So how does that play out in real terms on a day-to-day basis in the curriculum, Auntie? You mentioned earlier there's the art gallery, of course, that you have.
Yeah, I love talking about Worawa. So we have an integrated approach. So it's the education, the health and well-being and a culture. And all of those are equally important because without calmness and well-being, you're not going to be able to learn. And we see that. So it's a full boarding school. So all of the girls that come to us board at the school. And right now we've just returned for term 3. And there's always a bit of a transition because the girls are coming into a very structured environment. So we have to look after the well-being. Now, we've got a qualified nurse, we've got pastoral care, we've got services through Eastern Health and other service providers. I mean, right now I've got an each dental van that's sitting up there in the school grounds, and they're just examining every student. So they're getting well looked after, and I think that's really important because if you've got worries, as we call them, or something's troubling you, they're not going to want to go to school and learn. So that's our firm belief, that we have to look after their social and emotional well-being. And sometimes there are things that might be troubling them from their family or from their, back home. So we have a lot of communication with the families, and the families are able to bring their child to the school at the beginning of term and then come and pick them up at the end of term. And at the end of each year, we have a big family forum where we work for 2 days and the families tell us what the aspirations are for their child and for their community. And that helps us to develop a personalised learning plan for each child. So that's what our team works to. And we take a multidisciplinary approach. So every Monday morning, we all sit around and look at every student and how they are progressing in class, in the boarding house, with the pastoral care worker, with the nurse. So it's a very caring and very supporting approach.
You must have seen countless success stories come through your
Indeed.
school, and very proud of some of the young women. Who are some of those young women who have inspired you, who have come through your school under your guidance?
Well, I can go back even further than that, to be honest, because we started out as a co-ed school, and many of the young people that came through our school are now leaders in the community and hold high positions in government services. And some of them have been in the arts as in radio, NITV, and taking up leadership roles in community development or in social work and so forth. So, and you know what? They all keep in touch with us at the school. Facebook can be a really good thing. It can be a bother, but
True way.
it's a good way. And so we like to be able to have contact with our alumni. And more recently, when we changed to being an all-girls school in 2010, we've had some girls that come through there. Now, we were only catering for the middle years, so that was from years 7 till 10. And we have partnerships with other schools whereby if a student wanted to go on and do VCE, we would establish a scholarship with the partner school and they could go on. So right now I've got some girls that are in university that are just, the alumni. So they went to schools like Melbourne Girls Grammar, to Genesano, MLC. So those are some of the things we continue to have partnerships with those schools, but since we've now opened or extended our curriculum to include VCAL, so that's years 11 and 12, and it's vocational learning, but the students who wish to do VCE, we can still find scholarships for them that want to do that very strong academic program. But many of them are quite happy doing the VCAL program, which will translate if they wish to at a later date.
I'm wondering what some of the young women think of you, of course, being a member of the Sapphires and a film star, of course. Your
well,
story
they don't
is
forget.
made into film. But do they humbug you about that or what?
Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, we don't use a bell to signal change of class or beginning of class because the bell has some negative connotations for many of us who from a mission life. So what we do is play music, and we like the Sapphires. So you come up to Worawa, you'll hear the Sapphires singing. So that's that. But no, look, the girls love it, and there's been occasions when teachers have, done something on the quiet. Maybe it's to celebrate my birthday, but I'll walk into the performing arts room, and we do have one, and here they are all in their blue sapphire outfits, So, it's very heartwarming, and they love it.
That's too cute.
And sometimes, they'll just come in and sit down in front of me, and and my door is always open, so they'll come in and they'll ask me things. And one little girl today was saying she'd been to Cummeragunja, and I said, really? And she's from Haas Bluff or somewhere, So she was telling me about, So it's just all of this, and she was telling me about being to the Cummeragunja school and everything. So anyway, that's just another story.
Incredible.
But no, the girls, I think, really like that. They like to hear about my time as a sapphire or my time as a model, and fortunately I'm able to show them some photos so that it's kind of reality and not gammon, as we say.
That's it. You're absolutely not gammon. We've got proof of that right here from this conversation this evening. Aunty Lois Peeler, continuing the narrative, how do you move into the future and continue the current narrative?
Well, for me that's very important, and I feel I have an obligation in passing on our knowledge and keeping alive our culture, and we do that, I think, very well at Worawa. But I'm also involved in, as you've heard, in government and so forth, and things like the Aboriginal Justice Forum and the Regional Aboriginal Justice Advisory Committee in education sector. So I think history is really important, and that's the true history. So I do a lot of that. We talk about our experiences and from both, the success, the achievements and things, but also I feel our young people need to know the true history of why things are the way that they are. Why do we have many of our families suffer from intergenerational trauma, the lack of access to education, so there needs to be some understanding about why that is. And so I feel obligated to be able to tell everyone that, but also to celebrate our achievements. And we celebrate achievements, big or small. So that's one of the things that, I feel that we need to keep telling the stories, the history, celebrating culture, and giving the young people the opportunity to know who they are, to celebrate their culture wherever they might come from, be proud of their identity, and because I think being proud of your identity and builds your self-esteem, and that's another way of growth, I feel.
I absolutely applaud you for the work you're doing with our young ones. As we know, the statistics for Aboriginal young people, they're 5 times more likely to commit suicide than non-Indigenous children in this country. So we need these programs. And Aunty Lois, I want to wish you all the best into the future with Worawa College. And thank you so much for joining us for History Salon this evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Oh, they're beautiful, aren't they? Just gorgeous. And thank you to our beautiful audience for coming along on such a cold evening as well. How was that, Aunty? All right for you? What? Nothing, compared to what Aunty's done in her lifetime. Thank you so much. Keep up the amazing work, and I hope we can yarn again soon.
Well, thank you all for coming out. I'm, kind of a bit gobsmacked, really. Sort of there's so much interest in my story, and so I appreciate that. Thank you all very much.